Keir Starmer started a reshuffle. It seemed a little bit botched at the beginning because he announced it in the middle of an Angela Rayner speech, and then it took ages for any news to emerge. But we do now have quite a lot of updates. There are quite a lot of positions we now know. I think we can get some of them up now. So the big moves are Yvette Cooper has gone to become Shadow Home Secretary. David Lammy has gone to become Shadow Foreign Secretary. Lisa Nandy has gone to the Department for Levelling Up. Wes Streeting to Shadow Health, and Jonathan Ashworth to Shadow DWP. And we should probably mention who they've replaced. So Yvette Cooper has replaced Nick Thomas-Simons. He's gone to be the Trade Secretary. David Lammy has replaced Lisa Nandy, who's gone to the Department for Levelling Up. Wes Streeting has replaced Jonathan Ashworth, who's gone to the Department for Work and Pensions. We can go to the next round, the next bunch. We also have Bridget Phillipson, who's gone to Shadow Education. Jonathan Reddles, who's gone to Shadow Business. And this is quite a big one, has pushed Ed Miliband out of the business brief. Ed Miliband is keeping the climate and energy brief, which was part of BASE. It was part of the business department. So this is a bit of a demotion for him. Nick Thomas-Simons, as I say, he's been demoted from Shadow Home Secretary to Shadow Trade, and Emily Thornberry has been demoted from Shadow Trade to Shadow Attorney General. I say demoted. Some people might consider those to be on the same level. Looks like a demotion to me. We've also got Lou Haig has gone to Transport. Ash, we're going to talk about some of the circumstances of this reshuffle today. Any of those moves, do they stand out for you particularly?
So I think that there's a lot in here that's really interesting, because you did have, I think, a lot of people occupying those front bench positions who didn't make much of an impact either politically or in the media. So, Nick Thomas-Simons, I can't really think of something he came out with that really cut through. Lisa Nandy, in terms of the Foreign Secretary brief, I don't think she did an awful lot with that either. There weren't a whole load of punches being landed on Dominic Raab, for instance, over the handling of the Afghanistan withdrawal. It seems that her main role when it came to being Foreign Secretary was kind of setting the boundaries of respectable opinion when talking about Israel and Palestine. And what that meant was shifting things away from a recognition of Palestinian self-determination, or indeed a right to self-defense, or indeed a realistic view of what's going on, which is a de facto one-state arrangement, more assertively shifting the Labour Overton window to, what you might describe as liberal Zionism. That's kind of the most distinguished characteristic thing that she did with the role. So particularly with Yvette Cooper and David Lammy, it's that their politics are not my politics, but they are people with a lot more media cut through than those that they've replaced. Yvette Cooper is, of course, quite interesting in terms of her role during the Windrush scandal. She's credited with asking the sticky questions which brought down Amber Rudd. It's something which I think really helped repair her reputation and advance it. I would be wary, I think, of buying in a little bit too much into the hagiography of Saint Yvette Cooper. She wasn't one of the people who rebelled on the immigration bill, unlike Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, and Diane Abbott, who voted against the Conservative bill, which introduced the hostile environment. She's also somebody who offered a bit of advice to Amber Rudd on how to weather the Windrush scandal, which I think is something which is completely at odds with the spirit of accountability, considering that what Amber Rudd did as Home Secretary is deport Black British citizens essentially on the basis of their race. David Lammy is somebody who I think has carved out something of a media persona for himself as a bit of a liberal hero. I wonder what that's going to do for Labour in terms of its pitch to, the Brexit voting seats it lost in the Midlands and the North. But it's undeniable that he's got media presence. I think maybe even a bit more than Lisa Nandy had. And as for Emily Thornberry, this is sort of emblematic of the muddled up thinking of Keir Starmer. No one can really decide whether Emily Thornberry, and I think this is something which Stephen Bush tweeted, is a liability who needs to be consigned to the backbenches because, she's kryptonite to Brexiters who deserted Labour in 2019, or whether she's a big hitter, somebody who is combative, intelligent, charismatic, and, can do some real damage to the Conservatives. Keir Starmer can't quite decide. So he's sort of putting her in these marginal roles where she's neither one thing or the other. Personally, I think that Emily Thornberry gets an unfair stick. So there was a Labour source briefing today, that she's a London lawyer, Islington Remainer, in very derisive terms. Now, of course, all of those epithets also apply to Keir Starmer. It's just that Emily Thornberry, I think, on account of being a woman, was unfairly dismissed from, being a leadership contender. It went to Keir Starmer, who I think has all of Emily Thornberry's supposed weaknesses and none of her strengths.
From Keir Starmer's perspective, he has replaced some weak media performers with some better media performers. So he can say, this was a professional decision as opposed to a political one. At the same time, I think on the whole, this probably is a shift to the right. David Lammy, Shadow Foreign Secretary, he's someone who voted for the Iraq War. Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary, she was someone when she had that role under Ed Miliband, who was known to be arguing for tougher lines on migration. Wes Streeting, massive Blairite at Shadow Health. He's clearly to the right of Jonathan Ashworth, and Bridget Phillipson to Shadow Education. Again, she's also sort of like a progress type. It's interesting there that Wes Streeting and Bridget Phillipson have both been given those promotions. They're two of the people most commonly touted as potential successors to Keir Starmer. So clearly, some people around Keir are perfectly happy for them to get their time in the limelight. If you're a Labour politician, being in the education or the health brief, quite good for your career, because Labour members tend to like people who talk about education and talk about health because they're classic Labour issues. The Ed Miliband demotion, I do think, is pretty significant. Clearly, Keir Starmer didn't think he was pro-business enough, so he's taken the business part out of his title. I'm not entirely sure if he's still going to be in the shadow cabinet. That's going to be fairly significant. I assume he will be, because it would be seen as too confrontational to tell him to lead on climate change and energy, but just completely hoof him out. So I imagine this was sort of the compromise position.